Mr. Green, Mr. Lawson began, his voice steady but laced with a quiet rage. You were once my brightest student. I taught you everything you know about mathematics, and you were eager, hungry even, to learn. But what you did after that, that was unforgivable. The class shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of where this was headed. Mr. Green's smug grin faltered, his usual confidence slipping for the first time since the moment Mr. Lawson had entered the room. He knew, instinctively, that this wasn't just about a simple math problem anymore. Mr. Lawson's eyes narrowed, the weight of years of bitterness suddenly visible in his features. You plagiarized my work, Mr. Green. You took my ideas, my research, and you passed them off as your own. You used my work to climb the academic ladder, to get ahead, while I remained in the shadows, cleaning up after others. A gasp swept through the room as the students began to piece together the truth. The teacher they had all feared, the one who demanded respect through sheer force of will, was no longer the towering figure of authority. Instead, he was a man shattered by guilt, a man who had risen on the backs of another's brilliance. I knew what you did, Mr. Lawson continued. Welcome to another interesting story. If you're just joining us, make sure to hit the subscribe button to stay connected. You're in for a treat in form of a well-told story. Mr. Green stood at the front of the classroom, his arms crossed as he surveyed the room with a look of superiority. The students were barely paying attention to his lecture, their eyes glazed over, their minds somewhere far away from the world of calculus. It had been a long week, and the last thing they needed was to be bombarded with complicated equations. But Mr. Green, well, he had a reputation. A reputation for being ruthless, for pushing students to their breaking point, for making them feel small. He thrived on the discomfort of others. Look at this, Mr. Green said, tapping the chalk against the board, his voice dripping with disdain. This is a basic calculus problem. I expect you all to be able to solve it with ease. But if any of you can't, well, he let the words hang in the air, the tension palpable. I'll have to bring in someone else to help. The students glanced at each other nervously, their hearts sinking. No one dared speak up. They knew what would come next, the challenge, the humiliation. All right, Mr. Green continued, his voice rising. If none of you can solve this, then I'll ask someone who's not even in this class to do it. Let's see if the janitor can figure it out. A shocked silence filled the room. The idea was absurd. The janitor? How could he possibly solve a problem like that? It was a joke, but to the students, it wasn't funny. The challenge hung in the air, sharp and biting. The students sat frozen, their pens motionless, their minds in a state of shock. What did Mr. Green expect? How were they supposed to solve a calculus problem when they were barely grasping the basics? As the seconds stretched on, the class's unease deepened. Mr. Green smiled smugly at the silent, uncertain faces before him, savoring the discomfort he had created. But little did he know, something extraordinary was about to happen. All right, he said with a cold smirk. Let's see who's brave enough to take a shot at this. One by one, the students glanced at each other, waiting for someone to rise to the challenge. But no one spoke. Everyone was too afraid to be the first to fail. The room seemed to thicken with the weight of the silence. The clock on the wall ticked away, each second stretching the tension further. And then, just as Mr. Green was about to turn to mock them again, the door creaked open. The sound cut through the silence like a knife. In walked George, the janitor. A middle-aged man with a worn cap perched atop his head, a mop in one hand, and a look of quiet determination on his face. He had no idea what he was walking into, but his presence immediately shifted the energy in the room. Mr. Green, ever the instigator, saw an opportunity. Well, he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Looks like you've come just in time. I was about to have a little fun with these kids. Why don't you take a crack at solving this problem for us? George, the janitor, stood there for a moment, his eyes scanning the blackboard. His face betrayed no sign of fear, no hint of hesitation. He simply set down the mop with a soft thud and walked toward the chalkboard. The students watched, their mouths slightly open, as he took a piece of chalk. With a quiet, steady hand, he began writing on the board. The room was so still, you could hear a pin drop. It was a strange sight. This janitor, someone they all assumed was a simple, uneducated man, standing there solving an advanced calculus problem with an ease that made the students' hearts race. They could hardly believe what they were seeing. George's movements were fluid, confident, as if he had done this 1,000 times before. No stumbling, no second-guessing. His chalked handwriting was precise, his logic clear. And within minutes, the complicated equation that had once seemed insurmountable to the students was solved, elegantly and without fuss. The room was silent. Mr. Green, who had expected to watch the janitor flounder, stood frozen, his arrogant smirk now wiped clean from his face. The students, their jaws dropped, looked at George with a mixture of disbelief and awe. What had just happened? George stepped back from the board, his work complete. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. His simple gesture spoke volumes, silencing everyone in the room. Anything else? George asked, his voice steady, but with a trace of a smile playing on his lips. Mr. Green was speechless, the once confident teacher reduced to silence. He had no comeback, no words left to say. He had underestimated George, and the reality of it stung. The students, who had been ready to witness another round of humiliation, now found themselves in awe of the janitor. The atmosphere had shifted completely. What had started as a challenge to embarrass them had turned into a moment of pure astonishment. George, the janitor, had just become the hero of the hour. Mr. Green. The name alone carried weight in the halls, not because of his intellect or any notable accomplishments, but because of the way he wielded both like a weapon. He didn't just teach, he performed. His classroom was his stage, his students, the audience. Every lesson he gave came with a sharp edge, cutting through the quiet students like a blade. Mr. Green was no ordinary teacher. He was a man who found his joy in others' discomfort, especially when they couldn't keep up with the dizzying speed of his lectures. For him, it was never about teaching. It was about proving that he was the smartest, the most capable, the best. And if you weren't, well, that was your problem. But Mr. Green wasn't just an ordinary teacher. He was a tyrant wrapped in the guise of education, his pride simmering just beneath the surface. To him, everyone else was beneath him, fumbling in the dark while he basked in the spotlight of his own perceived greatness. His eyes would scan the room, lingering on the faces of students who struggled to grasp the complexities of calculus, making no effort to hide his disdain. The more they squirmed under his gaze, the more satisfied he became. Then there was Mr. Lawson, the janitor. He was the invisible man in the background, his presence hardly ever acknowledged by the students who passed by him day after day. He carried his mop and bucket like tools of humility, working in the shadows while others in the school basked in the glory of their titles. But beneath the drab uniform and the quiet demeanor lay a mind far more complex than anyone could imagine. Most students wouldn't have known it, but Mr. Lawson wasn't just a janitor. He had a past that was rich with knowledge, with books, with stories that could turn the world upside down. He had read the works of philosophers, mathematicians, and poets, each piece of knowledge adding another layer to the intricate mind that few ever saw. The truth was, while the students and even the teachers buzzed with their own small world concerns, Mr. Lawson observed quietly, listening to their thoughts, piecing together the story of their lives in the way only someone who had experienced both the silence and the noise of the world could. One day, as he silently mopped the hallway, his quiet footsteps barely making a sound, he overheard a conversation between two students. The topic was Mr. Green's calculus class, a subject that seemed to send a chill down the spines of most students. The young voices were filled with anxiety, filled with that familiar hum of doubt that Mr. Green thrived on. One student lamented the difficulty of the subject, while the other sighed in frustration. And then, without warning, Mr. Lawson, the silent figure in the corner, offered a single comment. It's not as hard as they make it out to be, if you understand the underlying principles. The students, wrapped in their own worries, laughed it off. They assumed it was just another piece of idle chatter, perhaps a trick of the imagination. What could the janitor know about calculus? He was the one who cleaned up after everyone, not the one who solved complex equations. To them, his words were insignificant, a momentary blip in their daily routine. But what they didn't realize was that Mr. Lawson was right. It wasn't that calculus was easy, it was that it could be understood if you saw the patterns, the hidden logic behind the madness. Mr. Lawson had known this for years. The only problem was, no one ever bothered to ask him. His knowledge, his insights, remained locked away, hidden beneath the layers of perception the students had placed on him. As the students continued on their way, oblivious to the quiet genius they had just encountered, Mr. Lawson didn't say another word. He just continued his work, silently mopping the floor, his thoughts deep and unspoken. But inside, there was something stirring. Something telling him that soon, the world would change. Soon, the lines between the teacher and the janitor, between those who thought they knew and those who actually did, would blur. And it would all begin with a single challenge. Because Mr. Green, for all his arrogance, had no idea that he was about to meet someone who could make even his sharpest challenges look like child's play. And the stage for this unexpected battle had already been set. In the quiet corners of a school no one ever thought to notice. The tension in the classroom was palpable, a thick fog of uncertainty that seemed to hang in the air, suffocating any attempts at normalcy. The walls, once familiar and comforting, now felt like silent witnesses to the unfolding drama. The students shifted in their seats, their collective gaze locked on the board where a complex calculus problem loomed ominously. Mr. Green stood tall, his eyes gleaming with a cruel delight as he surveyed the class, enjoying the power he held over them. He knew exactly what was coming next. Mr. Green's voice cut through the air, sharp and mocking. "None of you can solve this, can you?" He paced back and forth, eyes narrowing as he surveyed the room, his smirk widening with every passing second. "Let's see what happens when we bring in someone who's not even in this class. Let's see if the janitor can do it." The words struck the students like a slap, sharp and cruel. They exchanged uneasy glances, their minds racing. A janitor? How could a janitor possibly solve a problem this complex? It was a test to see who would buckle under the pressure and who would rise to the challenge. And the class. They knew there was only one person in the room who would fail this test, and that person wasn't Mr. Green. As the students struggled, furrowing their brows and scribbling frantic, half-hearted attempts on their paper, the weight of the challenge seemed to suffocate the room. Mr. Green's voice was like a haunting melody in the background, each word dripping with arrogance. He watched the students flounder, enjoying the agony in their eyes, basking in the superiority of his position. His grin stretched even wider, a cruel twist of fate. One by one, the students faltered. No one could find the answer. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. The sound of pencils scratching against paper was the only noise, a dull and futile rhythm in a space that once held the promise of understanding. Mr. Green's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. He had won. Or so he thought. The door creaked open. Mr. Lawson walked in. His steady steps, calm and deliberate, echoed in the silence like the ticking of a clock. He didn't rush, didn't hurry, but moved with the kind of assuredness that only came from years of quietly observing the world. The students looked up, their faces a mixture of confusion and curiosity. Mr. Lawson wasn't supposed to be here. What was he doing? Was this part of Mr. Green's twisted game? Mr. Lawson paused at the door, looking around the room with a quiet, almost dismissive glance, as though he had walked into a space far beneath his concern. He had been a fixture in the school for years, an invisible force in the background, a janitor whose name was seldom spoken but whose presence was always felt. Yet, in this moment, he was something far more than a humble custodian. He was a mystery. Mr. Green didn't waste time. He pointed to the board, his voice dripping with condescension. "You see, Mr. Lawson," he said, barely masking his delight, "this is a problem none of my students can solve. Let's see if you can do it." The class held their breath. The challenge had been thrown down, and the spotlight was now on the unassuming janitor. But something in Mr. Lawson's demeanor shifted. There was a stillness in his eyes, a quiet confidence that seemed to radiate from within, unspoken but undeniable. It was as though, in this moment, he had become something far greater than the sum of his humble existence. He stepped forward, moving to the chalkboard with a quiet grace that startled the room into silence. Mr. Lawson's hand hovered over the chalk, the weight of the room's expectation pressing down on him. With a steady hand, he began to write, the chalk scraping across the board in a rhythmic dance that seemed almost hypnotic. Each number, each symbol, was precise, deliberate. His movements were calm, calculated, there was no rush, no hint of hesitation. As the students watched, it became clear that Mr. Lawson wasn't just solving the problem. He was unraveling it with a kind of ease that belied the complexity of the task. He didn't just know the solution. He understood it at a deeper level, as if he had spent his life in quiet contemplation, unlocking the mysteries that others had failed to see. The problem on the board began to resolve itself, piece by piece, like a puzzle falling into place. The students, initially skeptical, now sat in stunned silence, their eyes widening with disbelief. Mr. Lawson wasn't just solving the problem, he was teaching them something far more important, something far beyond what any of them had ever expected. And as the final solution came into view, Mr. Green's smug expression faltered, his grip on his own superiority slipping for the first time in what felt like forever. The students looked at each other in astonishment, their minds struggling to comprehend the reality they had just witnessed. Mr. Lawson had done it. He had solved the problem with a grace and mastery that no one, least of all Mr. Green, had anticipated. The classroom was silent, save for the faint hum of the overhead lights. In that moment, Mr. Lawson was more than just a janitor. He was a symbol of quiet wisdom, of lessons learned not from books, but from life itself. The students had been humbled, and Mr. Green, for the first time in a long while, was left speechless. What happened next? That, my friends, is the story worth telling. I want to hear your thoughts. Do you think Mr. Lawson's quiet confidence is the key to his success, or is there something else at play here? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let's dive deeper into this fascinating tale. As the air in the classroom thickens with anticipation, all eyes turn to the blackboard. Mr. Lawson, standing with an unassuming calmness, holds the chalk with a steady hand. The murmur of the students fades into complete silence. Every eye is fixed on him. There's no dramatic flourish, no hint of arrogance, just a quiet confidence that begins to crack open the tension. He begins to write, each stroke of the chalk precise, almost graceful. His movements, though slow, are deliberate, as though each part of the problem is unraveling itself before him. The students lean in, their minds racing to understand what's happening. Mr. Green, still seated, watches with growing disbelief. His challenge, meant to expose the students' incompetence, is being effortlessly conquered by a janitor. With fluid elegance, Mr. Lawson tackles the problem, his handwriting crisp, almost artistic. The room is spellbound. Every line he writes, every number he manipulates, is a stroke of genius. The class stares, mouths agape. Some whisper among themselves, exchanging looks of utter astonishment. Others, frozen in awe, can barely believe what their eyes are seeing. And then, like the final note of a symphony, Mr. Lawson finishes the equation. There is a silence, a profound, stunned silence. Not a single student dares to speak. The problem is solved. No one expected this. Mr. Green's face, once filled with self-assured smugness, now drains of color. He stares at the board, unable to comprehend what he's just witnessed. Mr. Lawson places the chalk down gently. He doesn't boast. He doesn't need to. The room is his witness, and the equation is his testimony. But Mr. Green, his pride shattered, can't remain silent. He sputters, almost choking on his disbelief. How do you know how to do this? His voice cracks as he confronts the man who had just outsmarted him in front of his entire class. Mr. Lawson turns toward him, his expression as calm as it's always been. His voice is quiet, but it holds a weight that makes every word resonate. I used to teach mathematics at a university. The room goes completely still. It's as if the air itself has been sucked out. Mr. Green's eyes widen. The students are speechless. The man they've known for years as the quiet janitor, the one they'd barely given a second thought, was once a revered professor, a brilliant mathematician. The revelation leaves a trail of stunned silence in its wake. But the shock doesn't stop there. Mr. Lawson continues, his voice steady, as though recounting an old story that no longer carries pain. I used to be part of something bigger, he says. I made a discovery. A mathematical discovery that could have changed the world. The students listen, their minds racing to process what they're hearing. I was on the brink of a breakthrough, he continues, but sometimes, life doesn't care about your plans. There's a brief pause, a flicker of something deeper behind his eyes. A personal tragedy, he mutters, almost to himself, made me walk away from it all. I left the world of academia and chose a quieter life. No fame. No pressure. Just peace. The students sit in stunned silence. The idea of the quiet janitor, the one who seemed content with sweeping floors and mopping hallways, being a revolutionary mathematician is too much for them to wrap their heads around. Mr. Lawson looks at the students one last time, his eyes soft but firm. I had my chance to change the world, he says quietly, but sometimes, the world doesn't want to be changed. He turns and walks out of the classroom, leaving behind a room full of questions, of awe, and of a deep, newfound respect for the man they'd once ignored. The bell rings, but no one moves. They're too lost in the story of the man who had everything and gave it up for something more precious, a life of quiet contentment. Mr. Green stands frozen at the front of the room, his own world rocked by the revelation. His arrogance, his need to prove his superiority, crumbles before him. He thought he was the one in control. But the true lesson had just been taught, and it was one he would never forget. The tension in the room was palpable, a silent force that slowly crept under the surface of what had started as a typical math class. Mr. Lawson, the janitor turned reluctant hero, stood before the chalkboard with a calm that seemed almost out of place. The room had already been shaken by his earlier display of brilliance, his effortless solution to a complex calculus problem that left even the most intelligent students in awe. But now, the air was thick with something far heavier, something that none of the students could have anticipated. As he turned toward the class, Mr. Lawson's voice dropped to a near whisper, a stark contrast to the quiet storm brewing within him. You all think you know me, he said, his gaze sweeping over the confused faces of his students. You see a janitor, a man who mops floors and sweeps up after you. But there's more to this story, much more. The room fell silent. Not even the hum of the fluorescent lights above dared to break the stillness. Mr. Lawson paused, his gaze locking with that of Mr. Green, who had been watching him from the corner of the room. The teacher's once imposing presence seemed to shrink under the weight of Mr. Lawson's unspoken words. Mr. Green, Mr. Lawson began, his voice steady but laced with a quiet rage. You were once my brightest student. I taught you everything you know about mathematics, and you were eager, hungry even, to learn. But what you did after that was unforgivable. The class shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure of where this was headed. Mr. Green's smug grin faltered, his usual confidence slipping for the first time since the moment Mr. Lawson had entered the room. He knew, instinctively, that this wasn't just about a simple math problem anymore. Mr. Lawson's eyes narrowed, the weight of years of bitterness suddenly visible in his features. You plagiarized my work, Mr. Green. You took my ideas, my research, and you passed them off as your own. You used my work to climb the academic ladder, to get ahead, while I remained in the shadows, cleaning up after others. A gasp swept through the room as the students began to piece together the truth. The teacher they had all feared, the one who demanded respect through sheer force of will, was no longer the towering figure of authority. Instead, he was a man shattered by guilt, a man who had risen on the backs of another's brilliance. I knew what you did, Mr. Lawson continued, his tone cold but resolute. I knew, and I said nothing. I didn't need to. I watched as you became successful, as you built a career off of my hard work. But I never confronted you. I never exposed you for what you were. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew that the truth would destroy you far more than any confrontation could. The revelation hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Mr. Green's face drained of color, his pride completely shattered. The students who had once admired him for his confidence and intellect, now saw him for what he truly was, a man who had built his career on lies. Mr. Lawson stepped back from the chalkboard, his eyes never leaving Mr. Green's. You wanted to humiliate me, to make me the fool in front of all of you. But the truth is, Mr. Green, you've been living with your shame for years. You've been using your arrogance to mask the guilt you carry. And today, I finally gave you a glimpse of the truth. The class, once divided, now stood united in their silent respect for the janitor who had endured so much. They had seen the teacher's cruelty, but now they understood the pain that fueled it. Mr. Lawson's quiet strength, his ability to forgive, even in the face of such betrayal, left them in awe. For a moment, it seemed as though time had stopped, the world outside the classroom fading into nothingness. Mr. Green stood there, defeated, his arrogance now replaced by a hollow, painful silence. And in that silence, the students realized something profound. Not only had they learned the power of humility, but they had also witnessed the unspoken strength of a man who had chosen to rise above his past. And as the bell rang, signaling the end of class, the students filed out quietly, each of them carrying with them the heavy burden of a truth they would never forget. The classroom, once filled with the heavy hum of doubt, now buzzed with the subtle crackle of realization. Mr. Lawson, the unassuming janitor, stood before them, his chalk in hand. The silent clatter of his mop and bucket, once an indistinct sound, seemed a distant memory now. As he solved the problem, the students watched in awe, their earlier disbelief transforming into admiration. But what he said next, what he revealed about the problem they had all struggled to solve, would shatter every assumption they had made about the man before them. The problem, Mr. Lawson began, his voice calm but firm, isn't just a simple calculus question. It's a riddle. A test I created years ago, when I was still a professor. This isn't something you'd find in a textbook. It was designed to probe the true understanding of calculus, beyond the surface, beyond the numbers. This isn't a challenge, it's an invitation to think differently. The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of their meaning. Mr. Green, who had stood so confidently moments ago, was now visibly shaken. His smugness, which had once seemed so impenetrable, faltered. The students, still trying to wrap their heads around what they were hearing, looked between Mr. Lawson and Mr. Green. Could this really be true? Had the great Mr. Green, the one who prided himself on his intellectual superiority, just walked into someone else's world? Mr. Lawson continued, his gaze sweeping over the class, taking in their wide-eyed expressions. This problem was part of a much larger framework I once used to challenge my own students. It was designed to measure their true understanding, not just of equations, but of the very nature of calculus. The mechanics. Anyone can learn that. But the essence? That requires a different kind of mind. The students were frozen. They had underestimated him, dismissed him as just another janitor, a background figure in their world. But now they were faced with the startling truth. The very man they had ignored was more than capable of outsmarting the best of them. As the weight of Mr. Lawson's words settled in, the room seemed to shrink. The students, many of whom had tried and failed to solve the problem, now felt a deep, uncomfortable shift within themselves. They had assumed Mr. Lawson was simply a figure of convenience, someone who cleaned up after them. Yet here he stood, not only solving the problem, but elevating it to an entirely new level. They had missed something profound. In their arrogance, they had misjudged the very person who held the keys to the true essence of their subject. Some students, their cheeks flushed with embarrassment, couldn't meet his gaze. They had laughed at him, talked down to him, made him the butt of their jokes. Now, they found themselves looking at him through new eyes. Eyes that saw not just the janitor, but a man of intellect, a man of deep understanding. The class was quiet, too quiet. A hum of realization spread like a wave across the room. They had underestimated him, belittled him, but Mr. Lawson, with a simple chalkboard and a problem he had created long ago, had just taught them the most important lesson of all. Never judge someone based on appearances. Knowledge, wisdom, and understanding didn't always come wrapped in the packages they expected. The janitor had just outclassed the teacher. And as Mr. Lawson completed the problem with ease, his face betrayed no satisfaction, no smug grin. Instead, he simply nodded to himself, as though confirming a truth he had always known. It was the students who had to live with the lesson now. The room remained silent. Mr. Lawson stepped back from the board, his work done. But the work in the hearts and minds of the students had only just begun. The class sat still, unable to shake the gravity of what had just unfolded. The chalkboard was filled with the remnants of the complicated calculus problem, a problem that, for most, seemed unsolvable. Yet, there was Mr. Lawson, the janitor, a man they had barely noticed before, effortlessly solving it with a grace and elegance that left everyone in stunned silence. But as the murmurs faded and the air became thick with awe, Mr. Lawson did something no one expected. He paused. For a moment, he simply stood there, as if contemplating the weight of the words he was about to speak. "I never wanted to be known," he began, his voice calm yet carrying a depth of experience that reverberated through the room. "I walked away from it all, because the world wasn't ready for what I had to offer." The students exchanged confused glances, unsure of what he meant. Mr. Green, still in disbelief, stepped forward, his usual arrogance replaced by genuine curiosity. "What do you mean?" he asked. Mr. Lawson turned to face him, his eyes sharp yet tranquil, as if he had lived through more than the teacher could possibly imagine. "Years ago, I made a mathematical discovery that could have changed the world. It was revolutionary, a breakthrough that would have shifted the entire foundation of our understanding. But when I brought it forward, I was met with resistance, not curiosity." The class fell silent, their minds racing to comprehend the magnitude of what they were hearing. How could someone so brilliant, someone they had dismissed as a mere janitor, have made a discovery that could have altered history? "You see," Mr. Lawson continued, his voice steady and unshaken, "I presented my work to the leading academic minds of the time. But instead of encouragement, I faced rejection. The institution suppressed it. They didn't want the world to know. A discovery like that could shift power, could change the way we see everything. And they didn't want that. They wanted control." The room felt colder. It was as if the air itself had thickened, holding the weight of Mr. Lawson's words. The students, many of whom had once believed in the superiority of their teachers and textbooks, were now faced with a truth that shattered their worldview. "I could have fought back," Mr. Lawson said quietly. "I could have used that knowledge for personal gain, become famous, sought power. But I didn't want any of that. I chose peace. I chose to walk away and live a quiet life." The revelation left everyone in shock. This janitor, this humble man who had always been in the background, had once stood on the precipice of greatness. He could have been a household name. His discovery could have reshaped the world, but instead, he had chosen to fade into the shadows. The bell rang, signaling the end of the class. The students slowly began to pack their things, the weight of what they had just learned settling on their shoulders. As the room emptied, Mr. Green approached Mr. Lawson, his steps hesitant, his face full of regret. I had no idea," he muttered, his voice tinged with shame. "I was wrong to treat you the way I did." Mr. Lawson simply nodded. "The world doesn't need to know who I am," he said softly. "It only needs to know the truth of the knowledge I've shared." With that, Mr. Lawson turned and walked towards the door, leaving behind a room full of students who would never forget what they had just learned. As he reached the hallway, one student, still reeling from the revelation, ran up to him. "Mr. Lawson," the student called, "will you ever share your discovery? Could we learn from it?" Mr. Lawson paused. A small, knowing smile tugged at the corners of his lips. "Maybe someday," he said cryptically. "But for now, keep learning. It's the only thing that will ever matter." And with that, he disappeared down the hallway, leaving behind a group of students forever changed, their perceptions of knowledge and brilliance forever altered. As the camera zoomed in on the chalkboard, the final message was clear. Greatness doesn't always come in the form we expect. Sometimes, it's hidden in plain sight, waiting for those brave enough to look beyond the surface. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with your friends. Let's keep uncovering the hidden gems of life, one story at a time.